So welcome. Thanks everybody for being here. I've been coming to MuraCon since 2011, talking about Slatwall for a long time. And a lot of times when we do these presentations, they're sort of up and running quick and trying to get people to understand what Slatwall can do and how to get started with it. And today we're going to take a slightly different approach. And so this session is called Slatwall Unleashed. But before I get into it, just a quick background on who I am. So, hello, my name is Greg Moser. I live in San Diego. Been doing web development for about 20 years now, and specifically doing e-commerce for the last 15 years. So I remember back to really old e-commerce platforms, OS Commerce and things like that, lots of PHP back in the day. And then for the last 8 years, I've been doing CFML in Mura. So since about 2008, 2009, luckily for me, right when Mura open sourced their platform. And I was the sort of original creator of Slatwall and the lead developer of Slatwall from 2009 through 2014. And then in 2015, I sort of transitioned roles. Now I'm product manager and do a lot of solution architecting for the clients that we work with, getting in and understanding the business and developing technical solutions leveraging Slatwall. I'm a social guy, so if you want to connect with me at any point in time, you can follow me on Twitter or connect with me on LinkedIn. That's how you get there. I used to have a blog. And then I realized writing blog articles is hard. So now it just goes to my LinkedIn profile. All right. So today's goal, at least the goal that I have for today, is to reveal how 1024 is the company that develops Slatwall, how 1024 uses Slatwall to build game-changing solutions, right, for our clients. Some of those clients are here today. They can attest to the game-changingness of the solutions. But more importantly, how you can do the same, right? Sort of peeling back what's possible with Slatwall and putting a slightly different lens on what commerce means, what e-commerce means, and sort of the thought process behind Slatwall. So in order to do that, we should talk a little bit about who uses Slatwall. It's important to talk about this because it's important to identify whether or not it's the right fit for you, right? So we've got a lot of different types of clients that use Slatwall, as you can see. Hopefully some names on the board there that some of you recognize. But the real question is, why do they use Slatwall? Why did those companies pick Slatwall, right? So this is the G2 Crowd puts out reviews on software platforms. If you go to their grid and pull up software in the e-commerce space, you can see sort of this massive bevy of products. And the question is, how do I know which one to pick, what to use, why to use it? A lot of the reason to use Slatwall, obviously, at a conference like this is because it integrates so seamlessly with Mura. So if you're using Mura, that's a really good use case for Slatwall or a good reason to use Slatwall. But it's sort of looking at this grid, why use Slatwall? I don't know if anybody can spot us on the grid. A little bit of a Where's Waldo. We're right there, which on this massive grid. So if we filter this down on G2 Crowd and we get into e-commerce platforms, it starts to clear up a little bit better. So there's lots of tools in the e-commerce space. Where we fall is really as a platform. Call it a platform, a framework, an engine, headless commerce, right? That's really what it is. These companies that you see up here on the screen are about as close as you can imagine to complementary platforms. But if you look here on the screen in the upper right-hand corner there, you'll see Shopify. And then on the far left-hand side, you'll see Oracle. Right? They're on the same grid. These could not be two further platforms from one another as far as who uses them, why, and most importantly, how expensive they are, right? I think you need to set up a Shopify for about $50 a month, right? But it's not to say that every company can run on Shopify, obviously. Otherwise, Oracle wouldn't have a very good business model. So, if you look at how they mark this grid, just pointing that out there, where This is the main thing we still need to work on, but that's why I'm here. I'm hoping to encourage some people to boost our market presence. But the important thing here is if You look at Slatwall on this grid in comparison to other products, most of the satisfaction around products is around tools like Shopify, Miva Merchant, those sorts of things. The problem is those highly satisfactory sort of products don't have the breadth of functionality that something like an Oracle, a NetSuite, a Hybris, or a Demandware has, right? So what's interesting is Slatwall from a technical perspective and from a what you can do with it perspective very much more aligns with the NetSuite, Oracle, Hybris, Demandware. It's just a little bit different because all of those cost a lot of money and ours is open source, right? But that's who we compete against and that's who we're replacing in the organizations that we go in and work with. So still looking at this, why do I pick one thing over another? And so I asked myself this question before I came here today, sort of why do people, in fact, not just today, but we've been asking ourselves this question for the last year. Why do people use Slatwall? When is it a good fit? Why is that? So when people come to me and they say, hey, our organization sells B2C, okay, so direct to consumer, but our products are complex. They have some level of complexity associated with it. That's usually a good fit for Slatwall. Our organization sells B2B, which basically means your business is complex. If you're selling B2B, your business is 99% of the time really complex. Why is it complex? Well, you have per account pricing, or you have really specific needs around volumes of quantities ordered, or the way accounts qualify for what their pricing are, right? It's sort of, hey, if you buy this much from us every month, we'll give you 10% off and 20% off and 30% off. Add some complexity. Also, there's no credit cards typically transacted in B2B, right? You're doing purchase orders, and then they want those purchase orders going into their SAP systems and things like that. So lots of times, B2B just intrinsically is more complex. And then obviously, if you come to us and say our organization sells both B2C and B2B, yeah, it's going to be complicated, right? There's a lot of nuance there. So looking back at this grid here, we can actually break it up like this, right? So the top are all B2C companies. These are all companies that we've rolled Slatwall out for in the past. They're all direct-to-consumer type of products with limited sort of B2B. The second section are all B2B, right? These are, and the third are the both, right? So if we look at the B2C, what makes these complex? Well, the two on the left there are both wine companies. The thing about wine is you can't ship it to every state. There's all sorts of regulations about where you can ship wine, where you can't ship wine. Timing around wine is really important. There's also things called wine futures, so people buy wine before the vintner even makes it, right, or ages it. So there tends to be a lot of complexity around wine just in general. If you look at these other companies, Inc. Magazine, Scientific American Magazine, Fast Company Magazine, these are all magazine companies that are traditionally print products that do sort of a recurring subscription business, but in the last 5 to 10 years, in order to keep up with the times, they've had to really push a digital-first focus, which means that when you buy a subscription from somebody like one of these companies, you're going to get both a print magazine fulfilled on a regular basis and digital access to an iPad, and all of that just needs to be seamless and work well, right? And traditionally, there haven't been any out-of-the-box systems that can do a lot of that molding of both online and offline products, but that's the world we live in today. Buddy's Pro Shop and Spring Frame. Buddy's Pro Shop is a bowling company. I learned way more about bowling than I thought I ever would. And you're like, how could bowling be complicated? Well, believe it or not, when you order a bowling ball, it doesn't come with holes in it, which is surprising because every time I've been to a bowling alley, they were already pre-drilled, right? Well, the deal is apparently you're supposed to like measure your fingers and get the right depth and pick the right course. So the customization of a bowling ball is an integral process of buying a bowling ball, right? And also they're heavy, so shipping becomes a whole thing, so picking up and things like that become more important. So this is something that's a little bit more complicated than just ordering shoes or a t-shirt online because each one of these bowling balls is configured, and et cetera. And then Spring Frame is they do sort of canvas printing, again, uploading images that you're buying printed on a canvas. I'm gonna send you a proof ahead of time to say, yeah, is this exactly how you want your artwork to lay out? You're gonna approve that proof and send it back in, right? There's a workflow around the order and a back and forth, right? It's not just I'm buying some generic art online and it shows up to my door. There's that sort of customization and hand-holding back and forth with the customer. If we look at the B2B companies that Slatwall works really well with, DLC is a lighting. They provide sort of lighting content. I'll talk a little bit more about DLC as we go on here. But these are all B2B companies that have very large product catalogs, right? DLC has like 250,000 products in their catalog. They don't actually even sell anything, right? And I'll get into that a little bit later. But managing data sets of that size can be really cumbersome, and how the data gets in there. And then obviously we've got the both scenario. So Hayabusa Fightwear is one of the largest manufacturers of fightwear in North America. They sell both B2B to distributors and to retailers, as well as direct to consumer on their website. So they've got like 20 different potential prices, right? They've got their one customer price, their B2C price, and then they've got a whole series of different prices for their wholesalers based upon how much they're ordering, and they want to stand up both of those websites, but they still only have the same 2 warehouses, right? So they got a warehouse in Canada, a warehouse in the United States. They're moving inventory back and forth between those warehouses. All of that's being managed in Slatwall. And then they're standing up 2 websites that are completely different user experiences, one for the B2B side and one for the B2C side. But from an organizational and processing standpoint, it was important to do that all out of one system, right? Discover Central Massachusetts, they're tasked with engaging visitors to Central Massachusetts to engage with businesses, right? So on the one hand, Discover Central Mass has their customers being sort of the visitor that's coming to Massachusetts. And on the other hand, the person that sort of provides all the content for them and the one that they sell membership dues to is the businesses that are going to list events and that kind of stuff. And Region 10 is a similar type of scenario here. Educational group out of Texas that does continued education for teachers, which are kind of like consumers, but they also charge their districts for those classes. So just slightly more complicated stuff, right? And that's really what the landscape looks like. What you don't see on here is sort of just the simple, I sell hats and t-shirts, right? Gap isn't on here. Gap is simple. Banana Republic is simple, right? They buy apparel. Target.com is simple. As crazy as it sounds, BestBuy.com is simple to a certain extent, right? Those guys are all getting big, so it gets a little bit more complicated. But just conceptually, right, is you go on, you buy the phone, it gets shipped to you, there's a tracking number, boom, right? It's like a 4-step process. Everybody's familiar with it. So what I want to do is now show you why Slatwall is good for doing these types of things. And the first example I want to talk about is Total Wine. So Total Wine is a group. Is anybody familiar with Total Wine? Has anybody ever heard of Total? Okay, cool. Some people been on the East Coast before. Great. Yeah, they do have beer. Yeah, exactly. So Total Wine is, believe it or not, they're actually the 2nd largest wine distributor in the country, just behind Costco. Right, so they're really, really big group, and they were in an interesting situation, which is, they do that through 160, just so I can clarify this. So Total Wine operates 160 retail stores. Each one of those retail stores is about 30,000 square feet, and they had this situation was what they call their concierge business. Now, concierge business is buying wine futures, right? So what's a wine future? Well, if I'm a wine investor or a wine collector, I might want to buy 2018 wine from some vineyard in Italy, right? Some Bordeaux. And I'm going to buy that now because I think the price of that wine is going to go up, right? And so, Total Wine had this retail wine business, and then all of a sudden these wine collectors started coming to him and say, hey, you guys get all these wines from everybody, you're the biggest player in the industry, we want to buy, through you, these sort of future investment opportunities, right? Cool. So how did Total Wine deal with that? They dealt with it like every other company would deal with it. It's like, hey, we've got this multi-billion-dollar retail business, and now we've got these like 3 investor guys that are showing up wanting to buy futures from us, so we'll just like set up a Google spreadsheet and start some email forms and put a little form on our website that says contact us about futures. And that's how the whole thing started, right? go forward the next year, the business is growing and expanding, and the next thing you know, they're pushing 8 figures in Google Spreadsheets, right? Using QuickBooks Online, Google Spreadsheets, and emailing forms around, picking up phones, and trying to move all this wine around, right? How do we get, and what ends up happening is you're not actually allowed to ship wine, especially not wine futures. The person has to pick those wines up in the store. And then also, I'm buying the wine now, but I'm not going to take ownership of it for 3 years potentially, 5 years potentially. So I need to take some money from the customer for that wine today, but I don't want to take all the money for the customer. So their business model was, hey, I want to take half the money up front, and then when the wine shows up, I'm going to take 3 years from now, right? I want to take the other half of the money from them, right? So we got this sort of offline concierge business. They had an existing point of sale system called Micros. Not sure if anybody in here has ever worked with Micros, is familiar with Micros. It's one of the larger point of sale platforms out there. They had an existing e-com platform. In fact, TotalWine.com is still running on Hybris. That was one of those platforms I showed you in the upper left-hand corner there. Existing point of sale, existing e-commerce, and an existing inventory system that they built in-house. And you'd say, well, they got all these tools here. Surely Hybris and Micros and their existing software development team could solve this problem of just like, hey, I want to sell future wine. Well, the truth is, it can't, right? So they couldn't sell anything that they didn't have in inventory. Systems just wouldn't let them do it because the system's set up to say, hey, no, it's not in inventory, you can't sell it, right? Because we're retail and that's what we do. We sell stuff that we can hand to customers. You're like, wow, this is crazy. You guys can't do this. So, let's talk for a second about what we implemented. So what we implemented for them was a new site for their concierge business, allowed them to take partial payments. When somebody is going through that purchasing experience, we allow them to select their pickup location, not too dissimilar from being on bestbuy.com or something like that, where you're selecting which store you want to pick up from. It's also really important because that's where you're going to get charged tax and all this kind of stuff. We also implemented vendor orders. So they had no way to track this. None of these existing systems could track the inventory of, hey, I'm going to order 3,000 bottles of wine out in the future from this vineyard, right? So I need to put some sort of order in the system that says I'm going to do that. So we implemented vendor orders for them to sort of put in place the intent. Because even though they're selling wine from 2020, right? Even though they're selling wine that's going to be available in 2020, they'll say, hey, we're going to buy 3,000 bottles of this, and it will sell out in 10 minutes, right? Online. They'll launch it online. They'll sell through all that wine that they're not even going to be able to make or buy for another, whatever, 3 years, right? And they'll sell it. So it's important for them to track inventory and be able to decrement inventory, but that inventory wasn't on hand, right? It was this like future inventory, phantom inventory kind of stuff, right? And then they had to track it from when it got shipped to the warehouse into the individual stores. They wanted to be able to see that, track it, et cetera. And so we implemented that multi-location inventory and email templates and workflow here. So what does that really mean? What does that look like? I promise I won't just... So I had to log in there because unfortunately I have to log out every 30 minutes. So this is the Total Wine Concierge site that we built. It launched in 2.5 months after we sort of kicked off this project with them. And it's a pretty simple, you know, from the consumer's experience, this feels very much like a regular sort of shopping cart type of experience here, right? Where you've got a series of filters. Here on the left side, you know, I want wines that are rated in a certain way, reviewed by, you know, certain subregions, color, vintage, et cetera, et cetera. A little bit of complexity on the right-hand side with regards to differences between things like different quantity pricing. That's a level of complexity that often comes up, but was important, right? So if you buy more, you get it for cheaper. Then you've got some that are just a simple, hey, you can only buy it in 7 mil, and there's no discounts. And then they've got, you know, this sort of thing where you can actually buy this bottle of wine in 4 different formats of bottle size. So depending upon who orders what bottle size, they actually tell the vineyard, hey, you know, we need X number of 3-liter magnums, and which sounds awesome. So yeah, so there's a little bit of complexity there. So, but this is the site, and from a consumer experience, it's relatively straightforward. Other than, you know, when I go add to cart, the first thing I've got to do is select the store that I'm going to have this delivered to, and then from that point forward, my shopping cart knows that location, and everything's going to be bought against that location. I'm going to pick it up there 3 years from now. So the first part that I talked about that we set up was that notion of doing partial payments. So how do we do that? Well, luckily enough, Slatwall has a setting here for any SKU at any level. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me take a step back here. Yeah, any SKU at any level. We have a setting in here that says minimum percentage amount received required to place order. So if somebody's willing to give me 50% of the order, I'm willing to take it right now. You only got to pay me 50% up front. I can set that to whatever number I want, and I can set that at the global level, SKU, product type, whatever, right? So cool. Boom, that was a problem that solved that literally no other system could solve, right? And it's as simple as this. The other thing that we sort of were talking about were that sort of selecting your pickup location, right? So now this is an example order in Slatwall. Slatwall has orders, right? So this is the order as a demo example. Whoever bought this bottle of wine, and we've got a fulfillment on here of store pickup. Now this order can actually be broken up into multiple stores for pickup, if that makes sense. So it's really critical that they be able to see this so that way they can track from their administrator, look at their orders and see how many bottles from which are going to what location. One of the other things I wanted to talk about were that whole notion of selling inventory that you don't have yet. Right? And I would still want to track inventory, but I don't have it yet. So what we did here is Slatwall, all of those settings we talk about, you can set it at product type level. So we came in here and set up a product type of wine and have a product type of Bordeaux futures. And on that product type, what we've done is we've said, yeah, we want to go ahead and track inventory. It's important for us to track inventory, but I want my quantity available to sell to include QNROVO. Okay, I know it's a little weird abbreviation. Basically, all this is saying is I want to be able to sell stuff that I have on open purchase orders. That's it. I haven't received it yet from the company. I can't ship it today, but why can't I sell it, right? I know I'm going to buy it. So I want to include that in my quantity available to sell to customers. So you look at sort of what that means from an actual implementation perspective is they come in here, they create a vendor order from a vendor like Mondavi, right? Create that purchase order and they say, I can come in here and say, okay, when do I expect to receive this item? Shoot, I'm not going to receive it until, whenever, 2020, can go out here as far as I want, pick some date way out in the future, right? And then I can add my order items, right? So these various bottles of wine at these various quantities, right? I put that order in there. It's not going to get received for a long time, but since I've got that vendor order in the system, what it allows me to do is show quantity not received on a vendor order of 1,240, right? So because Slatwall is capable of managing inventory at this transactional level, right, and say, hey, I've got on-hand inventory. I've also got inventory that's not received on a vendor order. I want to take this number and put them together and call that my quantity available to sell. No problem. It can do that. And then that sort of multi-location inventory, what happens is these orders come in, they need to be shipped out to the stores. What's gone? What hasn't gone? Where does that inventory live? Well, they've got their primary warehouse here called New Jersey. And then in addition to, and you can see sort of what the quantity on hands are there in New Jersey. And you can see what quantities were ordered into New Jersey. And then you can come down here and see, for each of their individual stores, where there's inventory coming in. Now this is a sample product, so there's lots of zeros on this. But you can see, for example, in Scottsdale, I've already got 24 of those items on hand, right? So that whole notion of tracking the inventory around actually becomes really important for a group like this. And then when it comes to the actual processing, so stuff shows up, right? Shows up in their warehouse, and they've got to then distribute it out. Well, we have something for that too, right? So Slatwall has built into it what are called stock adjustments. This is a location transfer. And what I'm doing here is I'm basically saying I'm going to transfer from my New Jersey store to the Scottsdale store, right? Here are the items that are going from my warehouse to my store, I can create this. My warehouse guys can create this for me. And then the reason I'm shipping these are for these 2 orders that I need to fulfill, where these 2 people ordered 2 bottles and 2 bottles here, respectively, right? But even more importantly to that, we talked about workflows and emails. When these things get created in the system, Slatwall has workflows set up to say, okay, I created a stock adjustment, and every time that happens, we want to kick off to the manager of the 1007 store, which is the Scottsdale store, this, hey, you've got invoices headed your way, you've got an order coming your way of this wine, look out for it on the truck. When it shows up, pull it aside, and these customers are being notified. So there's this kind of communication that automatically goes out to the store. There's also communication that goes to the customer that says, hey, your wine showed up, you need to pay the second half of your bill, right? And so there's a screen for them to go in and pay the second half of the bill. It gets all tied back to their original order. Revenue hits the bottom line. So you can see where all of this is all baked in functionality into Slatwall. We didn't really create anything new as far as an administrator is concerned, but you can see where having this back-end system allows us to do these more complicated types of scenarios. So that's just one quick example of a way that we solve some really serious challenges for Total Wine. And if you have similar situations, it might be a good fit for Slatwall, right? The next one I want to talk about is DLC really quickly. So these guys are really interesting. So like the lights that are in this room, all these lights, there's a big push to make things energy efficient, right? You want them all to be, only consume so much power for how many lumens they put out and all sorts of fancy technical terms. So DLC is essentially the authority on lighting efficiency. And when they're sort of correlated to like Energy Star. If anybody's ever seen like an Energy Star sticker on your refrigerator, so DLC is the equivalent of like an Energy Star, but for commercial lighting, right? So what happens is everybody who makes these light bulbs submits their light bulbs to DLC to be vetted by DLC and approved and said, hey, this is good at this level, right? They actually test the lights for like 3 years to see how they perform and how they degrade over time and all sorts of cool stuff. So what that means is they have this massive product database, right? That they want to allow construction teams or general contractors to view and select the lights for their project. But there's also this whole process of how do the products get into this system, right? Keeping in mind that DLC has 250,000 products on their website, right? And so there's like 10 new lights that need to be certified every day, right? It's constantly adding more and more lights to this. So we needed to be able to. Also, the manufacturer that's submitting those lights needs to pay for it, right? They have to submit a $750 application fee, right? Get it vetted and then track it through the whole process. So we implemented a rich product database. Also, because we're talking about a huge amount of products, Slatwall has an integration with Elasticsearch that allows you to take all of your product data and serve it out of Elasticsearch. For anybody here who's familiar with Elasticsearch, it's a really cool search cache. And then we implemented sort of application management for orders, right? So what does that actually look like from within the administrator here? So again, I have to get my PCI hat on here and log in. And this Slatwall logs you out after 15 minutes as an administrator. I hate it. I wish it didn't, but it has to. Sorry. So this is DLC. You can see here we've got this massive product database, right? And if you were a company like DLC, and probably there's people sitting in this room that work for organizations similar to maybe a DLC or a Total Wine, if you were going to put this website together with this massive product database, going to an e-commerce engine might not be your first thought, but it's actually extremely well qualified to do this. So we didn't do the design on this, but you can see here we've got 278,000 products in here. All right, we can completely customize this view. Each one of these are an individual product, so you can see tested data, right? These are super, super granular. And if you're trying to pick lights, filtering on this stuff is super critical, right? So I want to filter by manufacturer and category and usage diagnosis. So all of this data starts with the manufacturer submitting it. Then they'll go out and actually test it, and I can test by things like how efficient it was or what the light output was. All of this is just baked in filters as part of Slatwall, because you can add any custom attribute you want to Slatwall and turn it into filters for product searches, such as this. And I can come in, filter on all this stuff, pick my test category, and then update this quickly. Search by brand name, et cetera, et cetera. I encourage you guys to go and play with designlights.org/search and kind of see how quickly we're returning a lot of these results and doing some of this bigger data. I can show this as a list, and I can flip around through these things really quickly without having to reload. And so it's, performance was a really big issue for them in the past. So we've got this great product search database, but it's not just the product search database. Well, that is important. If you look at the actual data here, right? So all of this data that drove those product search is all here in the administrator, right? So all of these are just native in Slatwall fields. I have no idea what this product is. I have no idea why it doesn't have these things filled out, but I'm sure there's a good reason for it. These things are, the breadth of data is pretty remarkable. But this is, again, just sort of out-of-the-box stuff here. And not only that, if I'm in DLC and I log in as a manufacturer here, I can come in here and create an application. Like, hey, I want you guys to certify my light bulb, right? I want you to do that. So when I go through, I'm not going to do it right now because it takes a little bit of time, but I can go through a create application process, pay for that application, and the initial data that I put into the system immediately becomes a product in Slatwall that then goes through an approval chain, and then once it's done, goes onto the filtered list, right? So all of this is just managed vis-a-vis administrators. And then from the back end, this is how Design Lights manages that process. So this is one of those applications coming through in the back end. It's tied to the order. If this particular application had a fee, this would have been what the fee is that it's tied to, and so on. This is actually a test database, so some of the data is slightly off here. But yeah, so the entire application management process happens here in the back end of Slatwall, which I think is really cool. And the last one I wanted to talk about here today is Discover Central Massachusetts. So we're based in Worcester, Massachusetts, for anybody who knows Massachusetts. We work really closely with Worcester and the tourism groups there. And so they were in a situation where they really wanted to increase engagement with visitors. They wanted to connect visitors to businesses and develop a sustainable model that would fund their outreach, right? To fund their sort of tourism marketing budget, right? So we implemented for them a robust events calendar. Location management. When I say location management, this is almost like Yelp, where you can go on as a business owner and list your location and say what you do at that location, what events you're going to have at that location. We implemented membership benefits because in order to be able to post your information to this site, you have to pay a subscription, right? Like your Chamber of Commerce fees kind of thing. So they can go on, pay those dues, and then once they pay those dues, it enables them to add information about their locations, add events. And then most importantly, which I think is really cool, is since Discover Central Mass is getting all this visitor data, right? They're getting, hey, you're a new visitor, you're interested in this stuff, let me get your email address, let me build out the customer database of information, because it's not just for visitors, but it's also for local residents to use the tool, because it's got a really, really cool events calendar. And what they've done is they've allowed it so that, through the Slatwall application, so that the businesses that are in Central Mass can send emails to targeted groups and pay for that, right? Hey, I want to send a message out about my event, right? And I want to send that out to the Discover Central Mass database, and that email is going to cost me $100 to send out. But hey, I can now send this out to 50,000 people that I couldn't send it out to before, right? So it comes in a Discover Central Mass template. But this, again, is a sort of a different type of a scenario, but it still centers around commerce, right? Businesses are paying to be a part of this site. It still centers around commerce because businesses are paying to communicate to those people, and there's a sort of a whole process involved there. So if we look at what this actually looks like in real life, so this is the Discover Central Mass's website we launched recently. It's really cool. You've got this sort of events calendar, attractions, et cetera, et cetera. I can come in here to the events calendar and do all sorts of sorts by region. It's really, really nice, right? So we get sort of all of these events in here. And then as a business, when I log in, once I've subscribed and I log into my account, you can see, hey, manage your locations, manage your billing and subscriptions, right? Manage your users, manage your events, right? So you can come in and do all those things. So the first one is obviously, managing my locations, setting up those locations. Of course, I forgot to log in. That's all right. This is what those locations end up being administered like in the back end. We just use our sort of locations that are baked into Slatwall. It made perfect sense. We extended them to have the type of data that we needed. Let me just do this really quickly so I can click into something. Okay. Right, so I can open up one of these locations. The administrators can see all of this data. It's all housed here. They have access to it. They can set permissions of who can see what. We can see all of the location profile, their hours, right, et cetera, et cetera. So I have no idea who submitted this. It looks like they submitted sort of a partial fill out. Right, if it was a restaurant, what categories it belongs to. So then what that looks like when the person adds their location is something like this. Right, so we've got where it is on the map. We've got all this content, features about this location. What is this neighborhood? A lot of this content is something that could be done using. One of the great things about the fact that Slatwall is integrated with Mura is we're keeping all of this data in Slatwall in this particular instance, but a lot of this data could easily be done, both the event side of things and the and some of this sort of content relationship could easily be done in Mura because we've got that sort of tight integration back and forth. So totally viable use case here. And then from an events perspective, I haven't created any events here, but I can just come in here, create an event, go through this sort of event creation process, and as soon as I can actually charge for that event. This is the other thing that's really cool. So I can list an event, charge for that event. Discover Central Mass will list that event. I can pay for the event to either a $0 event or pay a $1 event because this is just an event product in Slatwall. And Slatwall can take care of physical products, subscriptions, events, access to content. So it's a pretty sort of full and robust feature set there. So again, another sort of example of non-conventional e-commerce, but what we really strive for is, a lot of the people in this room are developers, right? I'm a big advocate of using the right tool for the job, and you have to step back and ask yourself, for this particular project, is custom development the right decision, right? Because if you're going down the Slatwall path, it's custom development. If you're going down the Mura path, it's custom development, right? You've got somebody in there writing HTML templates and doing your design for the most part, right? We think of these things as being custom development as opposed to turning on an eBay store or a Yahoo store or a Shopify store that's got a pre-baked template in it that you don't customize, right? So if the product fits really well into one of those existing sort of templated systems where I'm selling hats and t-shirts, go for it, right? Save yourself the headache and heartache of using custom software. But when you need a custom solution, the thing that's important to note about Slatwall is you don't have to start from scratch, right? These don't feel like regular e-commerce sites, but if you think about it, they all are at the end of the day. So those are just sort of a couple sort of quick examples here. And then I just wanted to talk about a few new items, which we're really excited about. So we've got some big news. We have recently rolled out a new Slatwall as a service, and I'm going to be kind of talking about this a little bit in my Docker talk tomorrow, some of the ways that we did this. But what's great is you can now stand up Slatwall servers, get access, commit to Git, auto-deployed vis-a-vis Docker on AWS, and elastically scalable with Elastic Beanstalk. So our sort of Slatwall as a service tool now allows you to deploy quickly and easily scalable Slatwall environments that are PCI compliant. So we're a PCI level 1 service provider for the service and PA DSS certified. So That's a really cool, exciting thing, especially if you have needs that need to scale. The Elastic Beanstalk really helps not just from a scaling perspective, but also from a redundancy perspective. If one of the containers goes down, it just kicks up new ones without dropping any requests. So that's some really big news for us that we're really excited about, and we've been deploying sites like TotalWine and stuff like that on this new infrastructure, and should have all of our legacy clients moved over in the next month. So it's really, really exciting. And then we've got some bigger news, which I've been talking about for a very long time. So this slide on the left was my slide from my 2011 MuraCon presentation, where I said, what's coming next? A POS system. And then again in 2013, I said on the 2013 roadmap that I had mobile point of sale planned. But I'm happy to report today that point of sale is in active development. So very exciting for us. Yay. I finally got it. So we have a huge auction company that I can't name, and we'll be doing all of their retail business through Slatwall in the point of sale, in the stores, top to bottom. So that's really exciting. If you have any sort of point of purchase needs that will be coming down the pipeline here, to be honest, we have a development plan for this, and they're launching in January of 2018 on the point of sale platform. So we're moving off their old legacy point of sale platform, and they will be in a unified system using Slatwall start to finish. So really, really, really exciting. So that's sort of some bigger news. I'm here to answer any questions. I think I came in under time, which is great because I never do that. And I wanted to leave some extra time to show some new features and stuff like that too, if we've got some time. But I want to answer any questions that anybody has about kind of what I talked about and what's available. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Can you install Slatwall in like 10 minutes or not?
Yeah. You can still install Slatwall in 10 minutes. A couple quick caveats, just because these are some issues that we're working through. Lucy 5 for Slatwall is having issues right now. Lucy changed the underlying Hibernate version that Lucy relies on. So we're working with the team at Lucy to get those issues resolved. So if you try and run it on Lucy 5 right now, you might get a big fat error. Sorry. We'd be happy to fix it for you for professional support hours. Just putting that out there. So yeah. Any other questions about install, setup, that kind of stuff? Okay, great. And that's it. I think I can let everybody go early and get an extra cookie if there's no extra questions. Huh? All right, guys. Hey, thank you all very much.